Been cybersecurity for 30, 40 years, something in that range at this point. So it's a passion of mine to try to figure out how it is that we can continue to secure our critical infrastructure. For me, that's down to the point of doing that at a credit union level. How do we do that? How do we support the credit unions? How do we support credit unions of all sizes? It's not, to me, it's not about rolling up little credit unions into big credit unions. It's about supporting the credit unions that are supporting their community and their membership. I want to make sure that there's a reason that smaller credit unions exist, and I want to be able to support that. But at the same time, we all have the same threats coming at us. We've got the same regulations that we have to meet as we're going through. So a goal for me is to try to figure out how it is that we can actually do that, how we can meet those pieces as we're going. And so I have my marketing department made this really cool picture of me because I love riding my motorcycle everywhere. So this was these stickers. You'll find these stickers all over the country in various different places as I've traveled from. I've done all 50 states on the motorcycle, although not that motorcycle because I had to rent a motorcycle when I was in Hawaii, but all over the country doing that. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. It's really about preparing, right? So a couple of quotes here, right, that we go through. By failing to prepare, you're just preparing to fail. This was a Ben Franklin thing, but it's about being prepared for an incident, really, with more vigor than simply preparing for a compliance event. It's not about passing reviews or exams or audits. It's actually about being prepared for an incident. It's actually being prepared and being secure. If we can get to the point where we can handle the security of things and have those things secure, then we'll actually meet compliance, right? We get those back and forth. So our plans of what we're doing need to be something that we have tested, that we've kept up to date, that is a living document, not just something that's over in a binder somewhere on the shelf. Because the reason it matters is we actually have stats. We have the cost of a data breach report that comes out every year. It's showing that the cost of a data breach is actually $4.3 million. But that's the average cost of a data breach. But it's talking about that at a worldwide basis. If we narrow that down to the US, the number actually increases. It actually doubles when we go to just in the US. The average cost in the US is $9.5 million for a data breach. We're such a connected society, and you know how much we work with in social media, how much we have from a news and reporting perspective, et cetera. The ongoing costs of something that happens to us in our community really get to be much, much higher, right? If we are Target, yeah, I could keep pick on Target for their data breach, however many, a decade ago, wherever it was, but we have a data breach right there, and we lose a bunch of credit card numbers. People just go get new credit card numbers and they keep shopping at Target because they have the cutest baby clothes or some great toys or electronics. But if something happens and we have the data breach at a credit union, we're talking about people's PII. We're talking about our identity. We're talking about something that cannot be changed, right? And then people use that to perpetrate fraud in our names as we're doing that. So don't get me wrong and think that your data isn't already out there somewhere with all the major breaches that we've had, but not everybody has it yet. And if we leak it again, and now someone who couldn't get it from some other marketplace now has that, those records now get spread further and further, and that will actually, continue to propagate those things. And then we are community-based organizations, right? We aren't just going to get another set of users in another part of the country somewhere, right? We can't lose some customers and then just go get more, right? It's not like that. We're not that way. We have members and we're in a community. So losing the trust of our community can make it really hard to recover. Small businesses who suffer a data breach end up going out of business 60% of the time. And small businesses are defined as those under 500 employees. We pretty much all are fitting under that category, right? Those under 250 employees, those under 100 employees, those are actually even more likely to actually go out of business in the case of a data breach. So we need to make that we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? Again, I said I'm passionate about preserving the small credit unions because they actually serve a community, a particular community. They were formed for a reason, and it's not just about rolling up into another entity somewhere that's that. But a data breach can just kill a small organization like that. Um, so it's one of those pieces that we can go through and do. Oh, I was at a conference last week, and I was talking with one of my friends. He's a VP of cybersecurity at one of the larger credit unions, and he was dealing with he was being hit up by the fraud team that morning because they had actually just lost $9,000 so far that morning to people who were actually smishing or doing SMS fake texting to their members, and then actually spoofing their caller ID and calling, talking to them, getting that code that gets sent back and getting into their account and stealing from them. And those members had lost $9,000 or that the credit union was dealing with just that morning. This is not a huge number for a multi-billion-dollar credit union, but it's big money for a lot of credit unions, So, because this same credit union lost $100,000 in the shared branching scam just last year due to fake IDs to one actor. So one person who actually went across the country from Florida to California, doing fake transactions all the way. And every time they did it, it just the same thing, but making fake IDs and running through that from a shared branching spree. They kind of went through all the way, made six figures in 1 week. So anyway, we evaluate our risk portfolio almost daily sometimes, right? We seem to skip this part and only do our cyber risk portfolio once a year when we're trying to do something to get prepared for an audit. Anyway, we need to do better than that, work our way through those. So let me talk about some of the current threats that we have going on. We really have a rise in ransomware attacks that are happening. 8% of all the U.S. victims of ransomware are within the financial services side of things. It often starts with phishing. Even though we have malware prevention on our systems, we still hit things where a user gives away information that leads to the attack. We're now using other tools to help enhance our ransomware prevention, doing other pieces there. So we're working now with a company that actually has an agent that goes on your machine that happens after it gets past the anti-malware. It's not looking for keys. It's not looking for specific things that match, right? When you're looking for something that looks like this one, where they have a list of all the malware that they've seen, right? It gets through somewhere, it attacks somewhere. Once it happens, then they use that and make a signature file and send that out to everybody else, right? That's a reactive way of being able to manage that. So there's another tool that we're looking at. They actually use more behavioral analytics. So it looks for exfiltration of data going on and stops it as it's happening. It actually, when it sees those things happening to a particular type of addresses out there, it actually puts blocks into the machine immediately and stops that data from being able to be exfiltrated until somebody comes and looks at it. It looks at the executables that we're running, and if it doesn't have the right checksum, it stops them from running. It actually kills those and doesn't let that. So kind of whitelists our applications as we're going through. It sees when applications call up the encrypt routine that's actually built into Windows, which is what they're using to be able to go through and encrypt everything. It sees that, captures the data that was sent there, kills the crypt process, and then it actually has the data that was sent to it originally, which contains the key and allows them to unencrypt the data. So this is amazing stuff that's going on to be able to do that. The problem with this in the past has been you have to be of a certain size to be able to afford to buy it. You can't buy 10, 20, 50 at a time. You need to buy hundreds or thousands at a time. So we're working on a solution to be able to bring enough credit unions together to start the process, to hit that first number, and then we can add 10, 15, 20 at a time, so that we can actually help manage the need for the for the credit unions under 100 million, right? The credit unions under 100 million represent 65% of the entire industry and $90 billion in total assets. But we got to have the same protections as the big guys do, right? So if somebody like Patelco can get hit, and I know the folks that are actually over there, and with all their protections, they still got hit, then we are great targets for the bad guys, right? They didn't have this tool at the time. Now they do. So they've actually implemented that since then. Other things, BEC fraud that's going on. So increasingly complex attacks have been observed within the corporate credit unions and larger banks. So we saw an actual specific target, BEC target that was going on against all of the corporate credit unions. It really looked like somebody had a list. I got a list of all the corporate credit unions and composed something that was very specific to all of those corporate credit unions, and actually was sending out things trying to be able to get transfers to happen from the corporate credit unions. Now we have the rise in AI usage that makes the spoofing more seamless than before. It makes it a little more believable. The email messages themselves seem correct and seem legitimate when somebody reads them. A couple of weeks ago, we actually had the CU Intersect conference where we talk about a lot of things on the security side of things, and the VP of Member Services and Operations, so Brian Hensey at the National Credit Union ISAL. So make sure you guys know what that is. So we have the National Credit Union Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. This is a group of the credit unions all getting together, sharing information with each other about security, risk, compliance, physical threats, AI, et cetera. We have different working groups trying to make sure that everybody knows and sees and understands what's going on. Brian actually presented on deep fakes. So he actually went into one of those deep fake tools. He went ahead and went with the $5 option so that you could actually, there's a $5 version or the pro version for $11. Just really not enough money to really drive people away, but enough to be able to, fund what they needed to, right? He took and recorded himself for 1 minute and then went through with about 15 minutes and just kind of got a little tweaks on their little sliders and created a deep fake authorizing a bank transfer that sounded completely legitimate. He actually used this on the compliance call yesterday. Just, we're sitting there listening to him talk for 30 minutes, and then he plays a snippet of himself talking that isn't him. And it sounds like him. It has the appropriate pauses, the appropriate ums, all those kind of things. It sounds very much like him as you're doing that. If he bought the $11 version and spent an hour on it, I don't know that we'd have been able to really tell it apart. I think it would have had all the right intonations, all the different pieces that we needed to. So very impressive at what you could do. I talk to him every day, and I struggle to be able to tell the difference. I would think that you could spend a little more time with it and go with the higher level version and be able to fool his wife as well. So it's pretty impressive what you can do with those things today. So things to do here to be able to deal with that are actually to consider having a code word, something that someone else would not know. I do this. I have codes with my family to allow us to know when we're talking to the real person. We just have something that we can slip into a conversation that signals the others that it is actually us. Maybe I'm more security enhanced than others, but I just really see the potential of doing that. So it's the same thing. We used to have things with our kids when they were younger. Now my kids have kids, so now it's I'm dealing with the grandkid generation now. But when they were younger, they could let us know that they could actually call and let us know, or text us and let us know that they think they left the curling iron on in their bedroom. That was actually code for us to know in wherever they are, wherever they are at, they're in a situation they would like us to get them out. So that would signal one of the parents to go there to say, hey, you need to go. We need to get you home. We got to go do something, and just get them out of whatever the situation is that they didn't want to be in. Anyway, we have to explore ways to do that with our team and eventually with our membership. Maybe you have, so in the team, right? Maybe you have a set of credit union values maybe you print them on the back of your badge, or you have a poster or something like that. So maybe you can simply have a code that says third of five, which means what is the third word of the fifth value? And then whoever that is can actually look that up and be able to provide that. So something that we can challenge somebody with if we actually had AI fakes that we needed to work through. The other thing that we have is we have tools within our email systems to be able to help detect these things. Right now, Microsoft Defender it lets way too many things through email when we're using M365. There are other tools out there, things like Zix and Proofpoint, that we could work with. We've been working a lot with Mimecast lately. You can basically add a simple rule into your M365 settings at the tenant level that takes things after it goes through Microsoft Defender and pushes into Mimecast to evaluate. It's very, very telling for someone, for credit unions out there, right? If we'll actually go ahead and just put it in, turn that on, and tell it to go into monitor mode and see how many things that it would have flagged that Defender didn't flag, things that would have been blocked, things that wouldn't have been stopped. There's way too many of these business email compromises and phishing emails that are still getting to us, and we need to be able to stop and block those anymore. So these are tools that are looking deeper for things to be able to reduce that are still getting through. And then other things, being able to detect malware within things like OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams. Those are things that never get written to disk. And so our malware protection often doesn't see them if they just happen inside that ecosystem. So other pieces we have to watch for as we're doing that. And then all the trackers that happen in our email. So those are things that the bad guys are using to see if you received messages or not. Just having so when you receive an email, right, and it's got images, it'll actually go and load those images. If you create a 0x0 clear pixel, then it actually goes back and tries to hit something. Now somebody knows that email was read by somebody. So this is the way to actually remove those pieces out of your email so that it's not there. And it puts banners at the top of your email to let you know other things about it. So right now, maybe most of you, hopefully you have like the little piece that says whether this is internal email or an external email, so you can use that. But then to actually know other things, so like with Mimecast, it'll actually go up and tell you this email domain was just recently created, right? So if somebody's sending something to you, but it's brand new domain, now you could be much more suspicious of it, right? It'll come up and be orange and let you know you should think about this. Or if you're getting emails from somebody and talking about a transaction that you're looking to do, and that you're doing all of those emails with that person, and it's happening all through them using their Outlook client. And then suddenly when they ask you for the routing number or send you the routing number, they came in through Outlook Web Access. They actually went into Outlook on the web. Now that one actually will get flagged, right? It comes up with a little orange thing. So something's different. This is a legitimate person logging in. They are logged in, but they logged in differently. They did it differently than they usually do, right? These are things that we don't usually get to see, but using tools to actually dive a little deeper into that to help you get that, and to really look for those kind of things. And they now actually have things like BEC detection, where they're actually looking for those business email compromise. They're looking for the tone of messages. They're looking for it asking you certain things. So when it's something that might be one of those, it'll actually flag that up and actually say, hey, we see these signs. You should evaluate this message further, and actually make sure that you think about those things as you're doing that. Let's see what else. We have physical security concerns. So ATM skimming. So that's one of the things that's really happening a lot these days. We're actually seeing more and more skimmers that are actually put on there. I actually talked about this at the conference myself. I could sit here and talk about it for a full hour, but I won't do that for you. but using new tools, actually having different ways to be able to do that. I actually just pulled out my little scanner. So this is actually a skimmer detector. Trying to hold it up here. So actually, when you hit the little button and put it into the ATM machine, and it's the little reader over here, it can then detect whether there's more than one mag stripe reader in the ATM reader. So it actually is able to detect that and let us know whether somebody put a skimmer on. And I actually have, this is actually the reader from a Hyosung machine. So I can actually just put it in, put it out, comes out green. So I know that there's only one reader inside this machine. So it's tools like that help us to be able to help our members when it is that these folks are coming around and putting skimmers into our ATM machines. So having tools to work through that. I talked about electronic keys being able to be unencrypted. So if you have just door badges, those door badges may be encrypted or may not be encrypted. I find most of the time they are not encrypted. There's a difference in cost between those two. So people will often go with the less expensive one. But I can basically use a device like I've got here. I've got a Flipper. This is a Flipper Zero. So I can actually take this, read your door badge, and then write it to it. I can use this to open the door, but I have it in a nice orange case so that you can actually notice it and you won't. So I'm not trying to hide it. So they make these in other colors, in black or whatever, but I let people know that I actually have this out. But we can then write that same badge back to another card, or in my case, I actually have a ring that actually does RFID. So I can actually then write the badge to my ring, and I just hold my ring up to the door and actually open the door up from there. This is how actually I get in the office every day. I use my ring to be able to do that. It actually has the capability of storing other things on it. So I usually go and scan my badge at a hotel and break the encryption on that badge, and then write my badge off to my ring, and now I can actually open the door to the hotel with that. So and in case you didn't realize it, you could go even further. The microchip that we put in our dogs, so when you take our pets and we have a microchip implanted in them, that's actually the same kind of reader that we're talking about doing. So there are people who actually take and implant that microchip in their hand. And now you just write to that, and now you just hold your hand up, you palm your hand up. Doesn't look like you have anything, don't see anything. They're able just to do that. I'm not willing to inject one in myself at the moment, but it just fits inside the end of a needle, and you inject it. We do it to our animals all the time. So, but well, one of those things, fun things to do. Anyway, I was talking about ATM skimmers. Now they're with ATM skimmers. They're actually not putting that overlay that goes on the outside where you take it and wiggle it and try to pull it off with the tape. They're going through and doing a lot more of the deep insert scanners. So it's a little piece. It's kind of a U-shaped like this with a little piece, so they actually can insert it in, and now it actually sits inside the machine, and you don't actually see it. They then just get within range of that with a little antenna device and actually read all of the data from it. So it stays in the machine for a long period of time. And if you're not doing something like using a skim scan, or this is a Hunter Cat, which is a smaller one, but there's a skim scan you can get off of Amazon. If you're not scanning those devices can live in your ATMs for a long time and never be detected. But we're working our way to solve through some of those things. And then they take and go off and make cards and replicate them, etc. Vendor management. I wanted to talk about vendor management. So the NCUA actually sent out a report. They actually sent a new letter out to credit unions just last week, and they talked about the number of cyber incidents that have been reported in the 72-hour reporting rule. 70% of all of the notifications that they received about breaches were involving a third party. If you do not have strong vendor management protocols in place, this can really be a huge threat. So now we have to figure out how we manage those vendors better. How do we hold them to higher standards? We start with contractual obligations, where we make sure that we put several statements in the contracts, right? We do more due diligence, but we need to learn what things to work for. It's a big task, and we often just feel held hostage by those vendors, but we need to be able to challenge them. So we need to continue to push back on those. I actually have a security addendum that I use with my CISO clients. And I'll just add that to that. If they're not willing to sign it, we have to talk about whether or not we walk away. And I understand it's hard for us to do that when we have a long-term relationship that's already established. But if they won't add that into their agreement or even consider it, then that puts the credit union kind of in a position to let them know that our ongoing relationship may be in jeopardy, right? Even if they won't do something now because we're not in the time of redoing the contract, we should, those are things that we should be looking at. What we're asking for in those cases is not necessarily onerous. It's things they should be doing. If they can't say that they're doing those things, we just need to have a understanding in our relationship that they're not doing that. So we need to state them that they're doing the things. If they're not doing them, then we need to be pushing back. And that is one of the things that helps when we as a collective, as a cooperative, actually can do that together. We can push on something together as we're doing that. So having things like this where we get together and then we can actually go back to the team is great for being able to do that. All right, let's go on. Let's talk about some other updates that are going on. Because we had this conference last week, we actually got a chance to talk to the NCUA. One of the supervisors for the RISOs, the Regional Information Security Officers, was there. So we got to have some good updates of things from the NCUA side of things. So let's talk about that real quick. So first off, one of the things that came up is that the FFIEC, which is the Insurance Examiners Council that chooses the things that we do examinations on across the various different financial sectors. They've decided that they're going to actually sunset the cyber assessment tool in August of 2025. So let me give some background of what's going on there. So the CAT, as we call it, the cyber assessment tool, is a tool that the FFIEC developed with people from all of the different branches, right? So from the NCUA, actually, no, it was Wayne Trout was actually the person who was there from the NCUA to actually help develop that. He's now the director of the RISOs for the Southern region. So I still talk with Wayne on a pretty regular basis. So they developed that, and then it was used by the FDIC, the OCC, the NCUA to help measure the cyber maturity as well as the inherent risk profiles for different credit unions, right, or whatever entity they were doing. The NCUA went so far as to take the CAT and develop it into what their original tool they called the ASET, which at that time was the Automated Cybersecurity Examination Tool. It stands for something else now, still has the same name, but it stands for something else now. So this was the tool that the examiners, especially the RISOs, the Regional Information Security Officers, they used that to conduct an examination of a credit union. It was a scoring system that really helped to normalize the risk and help you understand your inherent risk profile, as well as the statements from the CAT built into a way that helped you determine where there were gaps. It helped you to find the gaps on various different pieces. And it helped to define what each of those statements was, where you could go to that statement and link back. It had a link, it was originally done in a spreadsheet. It had a link to a page that would actually go and give you the relevant guidelines in an FFIEC handbook. So it would go back to the FFIEC handbook. The thing that happened is that the FFIEC just updated the IT Development, Acquisition, and Maintenance Handbook. This is a significant chunk of the information that is in the cyber assessment tool was related to things that were there. Because they updated that handbook, that meant they needed to go and re-update all of the cyber assessment tool to be able to match new guidelines and adjust the statements, the kind of the questions within that whole thing. And they just decided that was too big of a process. And so they elected to not do that. keep in mind that the information, the IT development acquisition maintenance handbook, that was originally the one version that they were using was written in 2004. So now we have 20 years of change in IT that's reflected in this new handbook. And there are a lot of changes that happen. It's very different from that. So 2004, that's before MySpace. That's not even, so MySpace came and went in that time. There's so many changes that happen. So now the cloud wasn't even a thing at the time. Now cloud has become a big part of our lives. So being able to use software as a service, things like that, those were just not even really, they were barely even concepts that were real at the time when the book was written the first time. So that just to say there's a lot of change that happened between these two. And so there's a lot of updates that would be required. Anyway, the back to where I was, so the ASET that the NCUA was using was broken into different sections, so you could see what was actually legislated under GLBA, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, and Part 748A, and what was not. So you could kind of see the dividing lines, and those would actually be the dividing lines between whether something is a finding or whether it's a supplementary fact when they talk about it. So just to be clear, though, there are things that we should be doing that are not currently legislated. We should be doing multi-factor authentication, for example. That's actually not legislated that you need to do those. Those are still supplementary facts, but really, really strong at this point because they haven't been able to update the things that are here. I have spent many an exit interview actually going through and talking to, because we're CISOs for lots of credit unions all across the country. I get to go through 16 to 20 exams a year, it seems like. And as we go through all of those, sitting down in those exit interviews and arguing whether this is actually in this category or this category. So we've been able to move a lot of those or not, depends on the examiner as you're going through. But what's going on with the change here for what is now the ASET, which is the Automated Cybersecurity Evaluation Toolkit, is what it is that it's now been renamed to. The NCUA is providing that as a guidance for credit unions to self-evaluate, to evaluate where you are, to use the tool to understand your own risk profile, and to understand how they're in a way that is similar to how they would determine your complexity. And from that, here are now all of the statements that we can work our way through to see where we have hit, where we've not, and then links back into all of the books that actually helped us to understand what those are. It's a great process to use. If you aren't using that, I really would encourage you to do that, to work through that process, to be able to answer those things and to be able to find your gaps. And that then helps you to know where you need to improve. What are the things to be able to do? And you can find those things that within the ASET, if it's at a baseline level, those are things that are under GLBA that are legislated. So if you can't do everything under baseline, those are things you would be open to having a finding on. That would be the best way to put that. But as the FFIEC sunsets the cat, the NCUA has actually stated that they intend to pick it up and actually move forward with the ASET and continue doing what they're doing with the ASET. But now they'll have control of what's in there and be able to update those statements, be able to reflect the current status of things, to be able to put in the things that we should be doing a lot more. So they're going to actually take it over and actually continue forward with that. So we actually just had that discussion last week, that they had an intent of continuing forward with it, versus just telling you go use NIST guidance or CISA cybersecurity performance goals or some framework out there. Instead of telling you just to do that, they're trying to actually map those frameworks into prescriptive or proscriptive statements that you can actually use. So at this point, I would encourage you, if you have been using the ASET, to continue doing so. If you have not, it's a great tool to use to help know where you are and where you're sitting on the continuum. We're all on the same path of trying to get security better. It's just where we are in that in our maturity as we're going through. So we got to find where we are. And now here's a good way of knowing, what do I need to work on next? What are the things to work on next to be able to keep moving our way down that? So one of the other things that actually changed recently is NIST. NIST is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. So they create standards that the federal government has to follow, and that lots of other countries will also look at and use as part of their standards and guidance. There is a publication, so they created a publication. It's a special publication, 800-63, if you want to go look it up. They did years ago, and it had an example in it of what would be a good password. And it was based upon some poor assumptions at the time, poor assumptions now that may have been valid at the time, before the internet and people having access to various different things. And you had to sit down at a computer. So they wanted you to not be able to brute force a password. So they created an example of creating an 8-character password with at least one uppercase and one lowercase letter, with a number and a symbol, just to be able to have that change. That created what we now talk about as password complexity and how long passwords should be. It was for a different reason that it was put there. The guy who wrote that really upset about the fact that he actually ever gave that example and accidentally created a standard of how to create a poor password. So because we do passwords, right? It just, we have a particular way that we do that. We can go through, our computers now can take all 8-character passwords and figure out what it is in less than a day. So we can crack an 8-character password just by pulling it off of the network and taking that encrypted piece and then running an algorithm, and we'll come up with the answer. But even if we didn't do that, people choose passwords in a predictable manner, right? If I have a standard like that, so they tend to capitalize the first letter because it's part of what we do, have a bunch of lowercase letters, and then have a number and a symbol at the end. And then we have to have changes, and we make it 8 characters exactly, because that just seems to be easiest for us to do in our head when we're trying to remember a bunch of passwords. And then when we have to change the passwords every 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or whatever it is, we change the number at the end by 1, right? And so that's actually made our ability to guess passwords easier. It's just easier to figure out that it's password 1, bang, password 2, bang, or that it's summer 2024 or spring 2024, right? Things like that have made passwords much easier to guess. So NIST has actually adjusted those recommendations. They have been doing that as we're going, and right now they actually have a new draft standard that's out. And in that draft standard, a few of the things that are interesting there. So they use terms should, shall, or shall, should, shall not, and should not. So those are the terms in there for whether it's a recommendation or whether it's something you have to do. So to start with, multi-factor authentication shall be done. So we shall have multi-factor authentication on any system that has any confidential data. So if it's any data that's confidential, which pretty much everything that we have in a credit union is going to be, it needs to be behind a multi-factor authentication. So a prompt to your phone, a YubiKey, something like that we're using to give a second factor of what it is that we're doing. And then our passwords shall be at least 8 characters long and should be 15 characters long. So they're saying that our minimum password length should be 15, but they're not requiring it to be more than 8 at the moment. The password complexity shall not be required. So we're actually saying don't do complexity. Let people put passwords together however it is they need to. But because of the fact that MFA is required, a multi-factor authentication is required, it is beyond a password. There still has to be some other piece that happens. They're saying that you shall not change passwords on a regularly scheduled basis. So don't change passwords every 90 days. That just causes us to change passwords in a predictable manner, or have us write passwords down because we can't remember them all. So it's actually causing, poor password practices to be able to make those changes. So shall have MFA, shall have 8 characters, should have 15 as a minimum. And then no complexity required, and we don't change our passwords on a regular basis. That's still in draft form. It's out for a request for comments. They've done a lot of updates to that, and they're on the 4th draft at this point. So it'll eventually become the thing that will be required from a national standards perspective. And since our examiners have to follow that, we'll find that that'll be what it is that they'll want us to do as well as we're doing that. Anyway, there's still all great practices to be able to do. Keeping in mind, starts with MFA. So you got to start with having some sort of MFA. And there's also some good clarification that email MFA is not MFA. So sending a code to somebody over email actually does not count as multi-factor authentication, because the password that you use to get onto your computer is likely the same as the password you needed to use to get to your email as well. And so it's not a second factor. If somebody has the password to get onto the machine, they're getting into the email. And so there's not a second factor at that point. So email MFA is not counting as MFA. Just keeping that point there as well. One other update of things that happened in October. So we actually did have the NCUA reach out to 60 credit unions about the fact that there was an expected ransomware event going to happen at those credit unions. There was another government agency that came across this information and actually held on to that information for 30 days before realizing they just really have a responsibility to let people know when they know something is going to happen. And so they contacted the NCUA, and the NCUA then started reaching out to those credit unions and actually trying to call the CEO up and say, hey, we know that there's an impending ransomware event that is looking like it's going to happen at your institution. Please try to be prepared. This sent off lots of people trying to figure out whether this was a scam or not to start with. They did have a lot of trouble figuring out how to prove that it wasn't a scam as they were going through that process. They had to actually go in and call in whoever your last examiner was, have them in the call with you as well. Trying to do various different things to help prove who they were. That we were able to reach in and talk to them from the NCU ISAL perspective to be able to verify to our membership that this was actually a real call from the NCUA. The big lesson that they learned from that is that they have no they have no methodology of actually reporting things like that. The job probably needs to fall somewhere else. So probably in CISA. So if you've actually worked with CISA and actually have them do any cyber hygiene for you, things like that, that's the Cyber Infrastructure Security Administration. So that's the agency that would probably be the ones to do that. But now we need to know who those people are. So still an issue to be able to get through. But again, that's why it is that we have folks that are working on things like the NCU ISAL or what we have with CUNA and America's Credit Unions to be able to do things from a lobbying perspective to help try to figure out how we bridge some of these gaps. But there were no known events that we know of that actually occurred, but somewhere it looks like they may have gathered some intelligence that let them know that somebody had found some way to deploy tools. Because ransomware is actually a business, it's a business enterprise. What we theorize is that an affiliate, basically think about it as a reseller of a ransomware tool, had some things on one of their servers when they were actually when the group was busted, and they were able to see that they were a specific target of 60 specific credit unions that had come up there. So they were kind of working their way through that process. So if you weren't contacted, you weren't one of those. So good for you. Let's see what else we had here. Oh, so one of the things that we're trying to do to be able to try to help in this situation Right. We see as I talked about before, 65% of all the credit unions are under $100 million in assets or less, and that's still $90 billion, of total assets for the industry. So one of the things that we're doing is we're actually creating a virtual CISO cohort program, a way to make it where instead of being able to uh, it can be expensive to go and acquire services like mine, where we're doing virtual CISO stuff, where we're keeping up with this stuff every day, and we're advising and we're helping build a strategy and building a plan forward. So one of the things that we have talked about doing is actually collaborating together, right? So getting everyone together in a collaboration. So if we take and we put 5 credit unions together and we collaborate and we do that all at once, instead of doing that as individual things, then that can actually reduce the cost, right? That can get you to the point where we have collaborative discussions like this on a monthly basis. We can actually sit down and talk about strategy of different things with folks that actually can help each other, as well as from a CISO perspective, being able to help with those things. Make sure that everybody has membership in the National Credit Union Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. That's what ISAL stands for, and get connected with the rest of the credit union industry from a security perspective, a risk perspective, compliance, physical security, those kind of pieces, so that we have all those pieces together. And then, having somebody to sit down and actually help conduct tabletop exercises to understand what you would do, what you should do. Somebody keeping up with what's going on in the legislative and regulatory side of things, who's seeing all of the exams that are happening out there and can help bring those together. So we are looking for credit unions that are kind of at the same maturity level from their cyber program, and being able to help figure out how we can work with them as a group to be able to move those things forward. So our goal is still to get everyone better. And so if we can find ways to move everyone forward together, we'll do that if that's what it takes to be able to make sure that we can do that for everybody, not just the larger credit unions. How do we get that across the board? So we've created a program to be able to do that. We call the CISO cohort program. So if you have interest in something like that, that's one of those things. Talk to our account managers, and we'd love to try to put together and get those cohorts going. Try to understand what's the way to manage with those kind of different pieces together as a group to be able to make that work.